On the quiet afternoon of August 7th, 2016, two locals were out for a casual walk along a secluded rural track near the small town of Scone, in New South Wales. But as the pair made their way through the countryside, something caught their attention just off the side of the dirt road. Tucked within the undergrowth, only a few feet from where vehicles might occasionally pass, was a strange patch of disturbed earth. Soon after, forensic investigators were deployed to the scene to carry out a detailed examination. Their worst fears were confirmed. Shallow grave belonged to Carly McBride. Carly McBride was born on April 14, 1983, to her loving parents, Steve McBride and Lorraine Williams. From a young age, Carly was known for her bright, warm personality, as the type of person who made an impression wherever she went. In 2013, seeking to turn a corner in her life, Carly made the courageous decision to check into a rehabilitation center. This step was motivated by her desire to overcome a dependency issue that had affected her life for some time. Her goal was to recover not just for herself, but for the sake of her children, who were her biggest motivation. During her time at the center, Carly met a man named Sale Kenneth Nuen. At first, their connection was casual, a friendship forged through shared experiences and long conversations. Over time, however, their bond deepened, eventually developing into a romantic relationship. By August of 2014, Carly and Sale were spending most of their days together. They were often seen around town, sometimes smiling, sometimes mid-argument, like many couples who are still getting used to the rhythm of a shared life. Although they had their disagreements, to outsiders, they appeared to be in a committed and supportive relationship. Then came September 30th, 2014, a day that would change everything. That morning, Sale drove Carly to Muswellbrook, a town located approximately 90 minutes from Belmont. The reason for the trip was simple. Carly wanted to visit her daughter Cadence, who was living there with her father, Andrew Easton, Carly's former partner. Carly was planning to spend a few hours with her little girl, a short but meaningful visit. According to reports, she entered Andrew's home around 12:30 p.m. Sale, as agreed, did not accompany her inside and planned to return later in the afternoon to pick her up. However, when Sale came back to the house to collect Carly around 4:30 p.m., she was nowhere to be found. Andrew Easton told Sale that Carly had left the house earlier, following an argument between the two of them. He claimed she had walked off on foot, saying she was heading toward the nearby McDonald's, a fast food restaurant located roughly a mile away. Worried, Sale tried calling Carly's phone several times, but all of his attempts went unanswered. He suggested that her phone might have died, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Hoping she had followed through with her plan to visit McDonald's, he drove in that direction, scanning the sidewalks, storefronts, and surrounding areas along the way. He looked everywhere he could think of, even circling nearby streets, but there was no sign of Carly. That evening, when Carly failed to return to her home in Belmont, a return she had promised to make, Sale reported her disappearance to the police. Authorities quickly took his reports seriously and began gathering information about her last known movements. During the initial investigation, detectives interviewed Sale and asked him to recount the events of that afternoon. He maintained that he had returned at the agreed-upon time, only to learn from Andrew Easton that Carly had already left, walking away from the home alone several hours earlier. Easton's version of events placed him as the last known person to see Carly that day. However, there were no other witnesses who could confirm seeing her leave the residence. No neighbors reported seeing her on the street, and no passers-by recalled spotting a woman matching her description walking toward the McDonald's. Making matters more complicated was the fact that there were no security cameras near Andrew Easton's property. This lack of surveillance footage meant investigators had no visual confirmation of Carly leaving the house, nor any indication of which direction she might have gone, if she had left on foot, as claimed. Without footage, eyewitnesses, or a clear trail, the case quickly became far more challenging. In the days that followed, police expanded their search. Officers combed through fields and wooded areas behind nearby housing developments, hoping to uncover any item or clue that might point to Carly's whereabouts. Despite their efforts, nothing of significance was discovered. With each passing day, Carly's disappearance became more mysterious and more troubling. Her family and friends launched public appeals, urging anyone who might have seen something, no matter how small, to come forward. The community in Muswellbrook rallied to support the search efforts, distributing flyers and sharing information across social media. Authorities, too, made repeated requests for help. They emphasized that even the smallest detail might prove critical to solving the case. Investigators asked members of the public to contact the police department if they had seen Carly that day or noticed anything unusual in the area. After securing a search warrant, authorities moved forward with one of the most critical early steps in the investigation: a detailed examination of the home where Carly McBride was last seen. The house in question belonged to Andrew Easton, Carly's former partner and the father of her young daughter. A team of police officers arrived on the scene with a clear purpose: to search thoroughly for any trace of the missing 31-year-old mother. They inspected common areas, bedrooms, and outdoor spaces, looking for anything out of place. Items Carly may have left behind, evidence of a struggle, or digital devices that could hold communication records. Despite their careful and comprehensive efforts, police were unable to find any physical evidence that directly explained Carly's sudden disappearance. However, while the search didn't yield tangible proof within the home, the investigative team soon stumbled upon something that raised serious concerns, something they hadn't expected. Carly's Facebook account had been deactivated just a few hours after she vanished. What was even more suspicious was the timing of this action. Her account was deleted before the missing persons report was officially filed with the police. This raised red flags among detectives and posed a host of new questions. To dive deeper into the matter, law enforcement in New South Wales reached out to international authorities for assistance. They contacted the U.S. Department of Justice, requesting cooperation to access Facebook's internal records. Since Facebook's headquarters and data infrastructure are based in Menlo Park, California, the help of American officials was required to obtain the technical data, particularly account deletion logs, IP activity, and account ownership details. Sergeant Wright, one of the officers closely involved in the case, emphasized that Carly's Facebook contacts might also prove useful. In the weeks that followed, police launched an extensive and far-reaching search operation. Their efforts included the deployment of canine units, aerial reconnaissance, and officers on trail bikes scouring remote terrain. Despite the thoroughness of the operation, no new leads were discovered. Carly had vanished without leaving behind any digital or physical trail. Her phone remained off. Her email and social media accounts were inactive. No purchases were made on her bank cards, and there were no withdrawals or transactions of any kind. The complete silence, both digital and real world, became increasingly ominous. Investigators began to face a heartbreaking reality: the possibility that Carly McBride may no longer be alive. 9 months had now passed since the day Carly went missing. Her parents continued to live in a state of limbo, holding out hope but grappling with the painful silence. They remained deeply involved in the search, working alongside police and volunteers, determined not to let the public forget Carly's name or story. During this time, the investigation was joined by Detective Inspector Timothy Seymour, a seasoned investigator who brought fresh eyes and renewed determination to the case. Inspector Seymour quickly became a key figure in the ongoing investigation. He acknowledged the tireless efforts of his fellow officers, stating that police had followed every possible lead since Carly's disappearance. With no solid leads and a case growing colder by the day, police were relying more than ever on community engagement and public memory. The story of Carly McBride, a mother, daughter, and friend, still carried weight in the hearts of many, and those closest to her continued to fight for answers. But for investigators, and for the community at large, the mission remains clear: Carly must not be forgotten. The search for the truth will continue, for however long it takes. When investigators were unable to establish a direct connection between Carly McBride's sudden disappearance and her former partner, Andrew Easton, their focus began to shift in another direction, towards someone much closer to Carly in the months leading up to that fateful day. That person was Sale Kenneth Newson, the man Carly had been romantically involved with shortly before she went missing. During the course of the investigation, detectives began to uncover details about Carly and Sale's relationship that complicated the narrative he had initially presented to both the public and the authorities. On the surface, the couple had seemed relatively happy. They were often seen together, and Sale had made public efforts to support the search for Carly, But behind closed doors, things weren't quite as harmonious as they appeared. Police interviews and witness statements began to paint a different picture. Friends and family of Carly noted that her relationship with Sale was frequently turbulent. Sale was said to be intensely jealous, and that jealousy had reportedly caused several heated arguments between the couple. Despite the relationship being relatively new, it had only begun in earnest in August 2014. Sale often spoke as though he were deeply attached to Carly. In conversations with friends and even during interviews, he claimed that Carly was the first woman he had truly fallen in love with in over 14 years. In the immediate aftermath of Carly's disappearance, Sale appeared visibly shaken and distressed. He was vocal in his search efforts. He offered financial rewards and personally visited homes near where Carly had last been seen, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had witnessed anything unusual. His actions, at least outwardly, suggested a man grieving a significant loss and determined to find the woman he loved. However, as time passed, a contradiction emerged between his public persona and his private behavior. Investigators discovered that while Sale was presenting himself as a heartbroken partner, he had, in fact, begun pursuing romantic relationships with other women almost immediately after Carly vanished. While it wasn't illegal or even necessarily suspicious for someone to move on quickly, the contrast between his actions and his public statements called into question the sincerity of his emotions and the accuracy of the narrative he had provided to police. Further scrutiny revealed that Sale and Carly had argued just 2 days before she went missing. According to sources close to the investigation, the argument was sparked by Facebook messages Carly had allegedly received from other men, a point that particularly upset Sale. Detectives took note of this conflict, as it revealed potential tension that may have preceded her disappearance. The investigators needed more than patterns of behavior or inconsistencies in Sale's story. They needed direct evidence linking him to a crime, if one had occurred. Then, in April 2015, almost 7 months after Carly vanished, law enforcement conducted searches at 3 separate properties. One was located in Muswell Brook, the town where Carly was last seen. The other 2 were in the nearby community of Scone, roughly 15 miles away. The search team seized 3 firearms and took a 24-year-old man named James K. Nuen into custody. The mention of James K. Nuen, who had not previously been identified in the investigation, left many wondering whether he might be relevant down the line. Despite the exhaustive investigation, the months continued to drag on with no major breakthroughs. New interviews were conducted. Yet the mystery of what happened to Carly remained unsolved. 2 full years passed without closure. Then on the afternoon of August 7, 2016, 2 local pedestrians were walking along a quiet rural track in the countryside near Scone when they noticed something unusual in the bushland just off the road. What they had discovered appeared to be a shallow grave, only a few feet from where vehicles occasionally passed. The discovery was reported to local authorities immediately, and police quickly secured the scene. Forensic experts were brought in to examine, and within days, their suspicions were confirmed. The shallow grave belonged to Carly McBride. The police chose not to make the discovery public right away. Their decision to delay was strategic. They hoped that keeping the information private for a short time might give them an opportunity to gather fresh evidence or potentially monitor the behavior of persons of interest who might react to the discovery. Despite the detections of Carly, police declined to name any suspects publicly. For 10 long months following the discovery of Carly McBride's remains, law enforcement officials continued their diligent work behind the scenes. Investigators combed through digital records, phone data, timelines, and witness accounts, searching for the evidence needed to finally take decisive legal action. Their patience and persistence ultimately led to a major development. On June 19, 2017, police officers formally executed an arrest warrant for Sale Nuen. He was taken into custody and transported to a nearby police station for questioning. After nearly 3 years of uncertainty, the man who had once claimed to love Carly, who had joined in public searches and campaigns for her return, was now at the center of the criminal investigation. Despite being arrested, Sale Nuen denied any involvement in Carly McBride's death. He maintained his innocence throughout his interviews and initial hearings, insisting he had no knowledge of what happened to her after she left her ex-partner's home in Muswell Brook. However, Nuen was not the only individual to face legal consequences. Authorities also charged a second person, 26-year-old James Nuen, the man previously arrested in 2015 during a separate investigation. Police now believed Nuen played a supporting role in the case. Specifically, they alleged he had helped Nuen conceal Carly. While the exact nature of his involvement was still being investigated, prosecutors argued that Nuen's actions had helped delay the discovery of the truth. Interestingly, all three individuals, Carly, Sale Nuen, and James Nuen, had a shared connection. They had all met while attending the same rehabilitation center. Though each left the facility at different times and under different circumstances, they remained in contact after their departures. The relationships among them formed a complex web that detectives now had to unravel in order to determine motives, opportunities, and timelines. In August 2018, more than 4 years after Carly was last seen alive, the trial of Sale Nuen officially began. Due to the complicated nature of the case and the lack of direct forensic evidence, the trial process extended over several years. Much of the prosecution's argument was based on circumstantial evidence, requiring careful presentation to create a cohesive and convincing narrative for the jury. Prosecutors alleged that Carly had met with Sale shortly after leaving Andrew Easton's home in Muswellbrook. It was during this meeting, they claimed, that an altercation occurred. They believed Sale physically assaulted Carly and later sought help from Nuen to hide what had happened. While there were no eyewitnesses or security camera footage of the alleged event, investigators presented a series of clues that, when connected, suggested a disturbing chain of events. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence was discovered during a search of Nuen's home. Hidden in a shoebox underneath his bed was a folded map. The map had circles drawn around several key towns, including Muswellbrook and Scone, the same general area where Carly's remains were later found. Investigators took this as a potentially significant clue. On the map, handwritten numbers 1, 2, and 3 marked locations just outside Muswellbrook. These cameras track vehicles entering and exiting specific areas, and their inclusion on the map suggested someone had been planning movements with surveillance in mind. Another disturbing detail emerged from Carly's recovered items. The clothing matched exactly what she had been wearing on the day she disappeared. Adding to this, neither her purse nor her mobile phone was ever recovered, despite extensive searches. Investigators believed that these items had been intentionally disposed of to limit digital tracking and delay the investigation. Further scrutiny of Sale Nuen's phone revealed suspicious behavior. Specifically, his location services, typically used by apps and devices to track movements, had been manually turned off and later reactivated. The time period during which these settings were disabled spanned from September 18 to October 2, 2014, the critical days surrounding Carly's disappearance. Perhaps one of the most unsettling discoveries was tied to a photo used in the early stages of the missing person campaign. After Carly disappeared, a photo of her, one that had been taken by Nuen during their drive to Muswellbrook, was used on flyers and social media to raise awareness. But during the trial, digital forensics experts testified that the photo had been edited and cropped before Carly had even been reported missing. And then there was one final, deeply personal detail that stood out during the trial. Not long after the discovery of Carly's remains in 2016, Sale Nuen made an unexpected phone call to Carly's father, Steve. The communication occurred just as the family was being forced to confront the painful reality of Carly's fate, and some interpreted it as a manipulative attempt to manage perception or emotions. When the search for Carly McBride first began, Sale Nuen quickly stepped into the public eye, portraying himself as a heartbroken man, desperately searching for the woman he loved. As part of that image, he publicly offered a $20,000 reward for any information that might lead to Carly's return. At first glance, it appeared to be a generous and hopeful gesture. However, as investigators began digging into his financial records, they discovered a troubling contradiction. Nuen's bank account was nearly empty. This led detectives to suspect that the offer had never been genuine. Instead, they believed it was a calculated move. One made because Nuen was confident no one would ever be able to claim it. To police, it looked more like a performative act, intended to draw attention away from himself and build a narrative of a grieving partner who had nothing to hide. In fact, Nuen's involvement in the investigation went far beyond what many considered normal. From the very beginning, He inserted himself into every stage of the search operation. On the surface, it might have seemed like the actions of someone desperate for answers. But the deeper detectives looked, the more it appeared he was trying to steer the investigation. Not to help, but to control it. During the time when search parties, including volunteers and emergency responders, were distributing missing persons flyers and combing the town of Muswellbrook for any sign of Carly, Nuen was elsewhere. He was in Sydney, sending messages to friends about his flashy lifestyle. In one such message, he bragged about driving an Audi R8, a luxury sports car that seemed far removed from the grief-stricken persona he displayed in front of the cameras. One of the most disturbing moments came when Nuen spoke to Carly's father, Steve McBride. In conversation, he confidently described the exact area where Carly had eventually been found, a rural location near Scone. He claimed to know the area like the back of my hand, but at that time, the location of the real crime scene had not yet been disclosed to the public. In fact, Nuen had only seen footage from a fake crime scene staged by investigators in an attempt to provoke a reaction from suspects. The confidence with which he spoke about the region raised serious red flags for detectives. As the investigation deepened, the evidence, though circumstantial, began to build a consistent narrative. Nuen's internet history revealed that he had searched for information on how to delete a Facebook account. While his own profile remained active, Carly's Facebook account had been deleted just hours after she went missing. Police believed this was not a coincidence. Investigators concluded that someone, possibly Nuen, had intentionally erased her digital presence to obscure communications that might have shed light on her disappearance. Like assembling a puzzle, the prosecution used each detail to fill in gaps. Eventually, the collective weight of the evidence made it increasingly difficult to believe any other explanation. One of the prosecution's strongest points came from Carly's clothing. When her were discovered in 2016, she was still wearing the same outfit she had been seen in on the day she disappeared. This indicated that whatever happened to her had occurred shortly after she left her ex-partner's home. The judge ultimately concluded that the motive behind Carly's death was rooted in jealousy. When Nuen picked her up in Muswellbrook, he likely expected she had been spending time with her daughter, as planned. But instead, he discovered that Carly had spent approximately 90 minutes alone with her former partner. Though her daughter had not been present during that time, Nuen's reaction was allegedly one of intense anger and possessiveness. It was believed that this confrontation ended in a violent, spontaneous outburst that resulted in Carly's death. After years of investigation, court proceedings, and emotional testimony, justice was finally delivered. In December 2021, nearly 7 years after Nuen reported Carly missing, a jury found him guilty of her death. Sale Nuen, who was 43 years old at the time, was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Even in the face of the guilty verdict, Nuen continued to maintain his innocence. Addressing the court after sentencing, he stood before the judge and said, "Your Honor, I'm innocent. From the day I reported Carly missing to this very day, I've been compliant with police, the courts, the jails, everything. I've been found guilty of a crime that I did not commit. Someone out there has committed this crime, and it wasn't me. I now have a big struggle ahead of me to try and clear my name." But the case didn't end with him. James Canneen, the man who investigators believed had helped Nuen hide Carly, also faced charges. Like Nuen, he denied any wrongdoing. However, in July 2022, a jury found him guilty. The court determined that Canneen had lied during 3 separate police interviews to provide a false alibi for Nuen, and had deleted key data from his phone to cover their tracks. In November, 31-year-old James Canneen was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. He was given a non-parole period of 4 years.